This week's going to run a little bit different. We've now spent a couple of weeks reviewing all sorts of content from your learning in grade 11. Maybe some of it's new, maybe you forgot some of it. And then last week, we learned a couple of new ideas, and we spent a bunch of time reviewing my code and fixing it up. So you had a lot of things to refer to. You were able to kind of study some of my structures, some of my algorithms, some of my solutions, and borrow from those to be able to improve upon them. And you were able to kind of build on top of a project so that a lot of the complex problems were kind of already solved and you were just kind of solving some extensions of them. We're now ready to try to build something from scratch. So this week, your challenge is an open design challenge. We're going to produce a full project from nothing to a fully playable or a fully fleshed out experience in kind of one of two areas. And before I get into the areas, a quick reminder or a quick explanation of expectations. You must, in these projects, integrate all of the topics from weeks 1 and 2. So that means you need to be storing variables. You need to be working with lists. You need to be running conditional logic. You need to be looping content. You need to be handling exceptions. You need to be creating classes and methods, and if you're in Python, functions as well. And you also need to be showing at least a couple examples of inheritance in there as we weave all this together to kind of prove to me that you're mastering the topics we've covered so far and that you're able to weave them together in your own custom ways before we move on to new topics to come in future weeks. Next, it must be individual. Okay, I don't want to have a project coming in that looks a lot like someone sitting next to you. I want to see your own personal touch on this so that I know, and I will be asking you to sit down with me and to have a conference with me about what it is that you're creating, what your plan is, and then actually viewing your final code and going over it together in person. So I'll have a lot of questions to ask you about your solution, so make sure that you solve the things yourself. Not to say you can't get help. Ask for some advice, ask for someone to help kind of troubleshoot and diagnose with you, but the code that you write should be your own. Finally, make sure you follow the syntax and style rules that we've been learning about in the course, and in particular, don't forget your comments. Super important, especially to put them in from the start to kind of organize your ideas and lay out your algorithms and then fill in the logic afterwards. No more of this writing the comments in 5 minutes before your project's due as like an afterthought. So, what are some things that you could do with this? I want to offer you 2 kind of general design ideas that will work really well for this project. However, you're more than welcome to diverge from these ideas if you have an interest in mind for a little project you want to make that use some of our initial skills. But make sure you clear it with me before you get too deep into it, just in case I need you to amend it or to scrap it because it's not going to fit quite properly. So let's see here. The first idea would be to make some kind of a battle arena with some RPG elements. So how might this work? I'm just going to sketch out a really rough conceptual design. I don't want to solve the full problem for you, but I want to give you somewhere to start. So maybe this involves actually having a generic parent class called a character with some stats defined for it. And then you branch off. It's kind of hard to write on this side of the board like this. And then you branch off from it maybe a hero and an enemy class that inherit what all characters in your battle arena will have. So the basic stats, but maybe the hero and the enemy have custom unique stats or behaviors that are unique to them. And this might allow you to make one hero and maybe a bunch of different types of enemies as well. Maybe you would even want to customize further down the hierarchy a particular type of enemy. Maybe you want to have like an ice enemy. Maybe you want to have a fire enemy. You want to focus on elements, or maybe you want to make it flying versus melee versus ranged, or maybe you have a better idea for how to organize this. RPG games have great hierarchical structures that you can embed into your game. And the idea being that once we instantiate some of these different objects, we have a hero in our game with some stats and settings. We have some enemies that are created. We can pit them against one another in an arena that has a bunch of logic in it that determines turn orders and different actions that can be taken. So maybe you have a dice roll for the hero to go first, they win the roll, and they do all their behaviors, all their actions, and then the enemy they're pitted against responds with some automated behaviors. Maybe they're randomized behaviors. Maybe you even are clever enough to program some behaviors that respond to what the hero does. So if I take a certain amount of damage, respond by healing. Or if the hero has low HP, just attack, be aggressive. Have some different scenarios that you can program in to make this enemy AI a little bit smarter than just random, although random would be totally fine. In here, you're going to be able to do all the basic ideas that we've talked about in the course. Create class hierarchies with inheritance, create objects that you reference attributes and behaviors from, create menu systems that have lots of conditional logic. User input is involved in this, storing variables, and maybe even having a big list of information. Maybe you have items that you store, or maybe you have enemies that you store in a big kind of chain, like you have to go through a gauntlet of fights, and the enemies are all kind of like chained in a row. You fight one after the other until you've defeated the whole set of them. That could be managed through a data structure really nicely. So I think there's a lot of potential in this battle arena idea that you could flesh out a little bit more and put your own stamp on as you think about what to make. The other idea that you can consider is creating a bit of an interactive story experience. Maybe something like a choose your own adventure. Choose your own adventure. If you don't have any experience with these types of books, the way that they work is you start on page 1 and you read a bit of a description of a scene, and then at the bottom it gives you some choices. Maybe the scene begins with you waking up in a cave and you don't remember why you're there. The lights are flickering and you feel this like dark ambiance around. So you stand up and you look around, there's a door, and you're kind of like standing at the door and you wonder, what should I do? And then you give the player some choices. Option 1, push the door slightly to peek through just to get some information. Option 2, rush through the door with a violent push just to make sure that you are like aggressively entering the room. Or option 3, don't go through at all. Just kind of head back into the cave and wait and see what happens. And based on what they decide, you can send them on branching storylines that they can experience. And as it keeps on going, you start at one center point, and at a point they have to kind of choose a branch in the storyline, and then each of these continue, and then maybe they branch off even further into other storylines. Maybe some of them reconverge at a point, maybe some of them fully diverge, and maybe some of them even end where the player dies. And so you have these storylines growing from things that are branching off and forming different webs of interacting layers of things. So maybe these join up and split again here, this being an end. Maybe this one is an end and this one is an end, and there's a whole other set of branches that happen down here of branching storylines where you can create a scenario where there's certain endings that are good endings for the player, where they might be kind of happy with the outcome, feel like they've accomplished something, and other ones that they hit a dead end where they made a mistake or made a foolish choice or just got led into a trap. And then at this point, whenever they reach an ending, they get kicked back to the start and have to play again, hopefully learning the lessons from the mistakes they made last time so that they can find a better path to victory, which might be some of these other branches. I think some got cut off at them. Oh, I can see it there a little bit. So in this, you have a lot of opportunity for making conditional logic and setting up some interesting content in different data structures. Maybe you have a whole bunch of different storylines organized in different data structures, and maybe you want to build a bit of a class hierarchy, something like this, where you have the idea of an area that you can move between, the kind of the concept of an area, and maybe each of these choices takes the players to a different area, and a dead end means they don't get to progress because they've made a mistake and they've misjudged something that they should have observed or thought of in this text-based adventure. And from this, we can like create more specialized areas. Maybe you want to have indoor areas. Maybe you want to have outdoor. Maybe you want to have different types of climates. Maybe you want to organize it in a totally different way than this with some hierarchies in your inheritance structure that you can build lots of content from a nice simple template and expand out into more specialized sub-things that you can include some storyline and maybe even some unique mechanics in there. Maybe there's a little mini game that gets involved sometimes where to actually be able to determine the right path, you have to uncover a clue, which requires you to play a little guessing game to actually extract some information. You step through into the next room and you find a puzzle box. and to solve it, you have 5 attempts to guess the right number. Or maybe instead you have a little bit of a riddle that you have to actually play a little mini game of some other idea you've designed to be able to solve it to move on. So you can inject really interesting little mini algorithms and experiences that you can code that can be woven into the storytelling. Or maybe you're thinking, okay, I got this unit, in this particular school year, 1 full week of time to create this program. Think about the timeline that you have. 5 working school days, each day, 2 to 3 hours, maybe 2 hours of class time, an hour outside of class time to work on this. And so think about maybe the first day, a few hours to plot out all my concepts and ideas. Then I got a few days to kind of work on building different segments of this experience. That's 9 or 10 hours of time. And then a final day to kind of tweak things and make sure everything's kind of organized well and presented in a nice way for submission. That's quite a lot of time to create a pretty cool experience. I'd say a dozen hours or so is something that you could make quite an interesting battle arena, or choose your own adventure story, or maybe you have some other idea altogether that you've always wanted to try in coding. You're more than welcome to propose it to me, and if I think that it would fit the expectations for this, I'll give you the go-ahead, and you'll get some credit for the course creating a piece of software that you've always been curious to create, but you just didn't quite have the skills yet. Hopefully we're there with enough skills to be able to create something cool as a kind of a check-in of what we've learned so far in this course. Really looking forward to playing your experiences and seeing what it is that you're able to design in your Open Design Challenge for this week.